Never in the history of the United States Navy have we killed our own and then blamed them for the killing.
Why would they want to take that many people with them?
The monumental hypocrisy of the Navy.
I lost 47 friends that day. After that, I lost more.
How do you do what you did to people and know what you did and sleep at night?
The USS Iowa was one of America's last great battleships, powerful, steadfast, and deadly accurate. The kind of battleship that helped lead the country to victory in World War II. The mere sight of the ship's enormous guns was intimidating, and they could zero in on targets more than 20 miles away. By the 80s, this once proud warship was aging, and there was talk of retiring her because she was expensive to maintain. On April 19, 1989, disaster struck. One of the Iowa's guns exploded. Somehow the mighty battleship had fired on itself, killing 47 of its crew of 1,500 men.
The families of the men who died on the Iowa were left confused and hurt by the Navy's handling of the tragedy. It was the beginning of a nightmare that destroyed reputations, ruined careers, and became one of the ugliest chapters in military history. 12 years later, many questions still remain unanswered.
On that fateful morning, the Iowa was on a training mission about 300 miles off the coast of Puerto Rico. The battleship's powerful 16-inch guns were being prepped for a firing exercise when something went tragically wrong in turret 2. The first fireman inside the blazing turret nearly lost his own life.
I knew if we didn't start fighting the fire, the whole ship was going down. So, it wasn't a thought of I had to escape, it was a thought of I have to get this fire out or I'm dead.
And after the flames were finally doused, the shaken crew began the gruesome task of recovering their fallen shipmates.
Just the outright carnage of it all. Seeing bodies that have no head, that have no limbs, burnt, the smell of burnt flesh.
You realized within a matter of minutes that that was a human, that was a person, that had been a person an hour or two before.
Once you experience something like that, you never really forget some of the things that you'll see.
A few days later, the visibly wounded vessel returned to the Norfolk, Virginia Naval Base.
We join today in mourning for the 47 who perished and in thanks for the 11 who survived.
Third-class gunner's mate Scott Blakey died in the blast. The last time his parents saw him alive, he was worried about safety on the Iowa.
He was concerned because they were doing things, experimenting with different powders, and that worried him because he knew they shouldn't have been doing that.
The Blakeys are still frustrated by the lack of answers about what happened.
And it's one thing to face losing your son, but it's another to have to deal with all of the lies and try to sort through what's truthful and what isn't.
But even before the ship returned home, suspicious things started happening. An order was given to clean up the fire-ravaged turret.
We were supposed to separate human remains from debris, and all the debris bags were taken and thrown over the side of the ship.
We were told to take it and throw it over the side.
This cleanup process took about 2.5 days. After the first day, when I saw a lot of evidence was being destroyed, I was just wondering, what's going on here?
I think every one of us thought, we shouldn't be doing this right away. All of us considered it very odd.
Even more odd were the initial onboard interviews for the investigation.
About every 5 or 6 minutes, if they didn't like one of my answers, they stopped the recording machine. And, you know, they tried to lead me in ways towards certain answers, and I wouldn't go there.
That was only the beginning of a sinister cover-up that raised accusations of murder, homosexuality, and suicide, and ruined the reputation of a dead man.
It was, to me, unbelievable that the U.S. Navy would do what they did.
They're a bunch of homophobes, and they're still a bunch of homophobes. They're the most homophobic people around.
The tragic explosion aboard the USS Iowa was a numbing experience for the entire crew and left them wondering, how could this happen and who was to blame?
We had 47 shipmates who had died. We really didn't have an explanation at that point why.
And Captain Fred Musali, the commander of the Iowa, couldn't answer that question either.
This tragedy was something I had hoped I'd never have to see as a commanding officer. And I'll say right up front that we don't have all the answers. There is an investigation going on right now to try and find out what happened.
The Navy leadership clearly made a decision on the afternoon of the explosion that they would protect themselves. They would make sure that they found a culprit, that there was not going to be anything wrong with the ship, nothing wrong with the guns. They needed to find a saboteur.
And they found one, thanks to an innocent inquiry by a dead sailor's sister. Kathy Kubasina's brother, Clayton Hardwig, was a gunner's mate in Turret 2. Hardwig grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. He was a quiet, unassuming guy from a religious home.
He loved that ship so much, and he loved the Navy so much. It's all he ever wanted in his whole life. And all he ever wanted to be once he got in the Navy was a battleship sailor. He had a tattoo of the USS Iowa put on his arm.
Kathy wrote to the Navy questioning the naming of another sailor as beneficiary of her brother's $100,000 life insurance policy.
It took me a long time to get over the fact that I personally directed the focus right on my brother's head. It was tough.
That sailor was Clayton's best friend, gunner's mate 3rd class Kendall Truitt.
What about the insurance policy that Clayton took out with Kendall as beneficiary? Did you think that was odd?
I don't know. I've been told by other people who are in the Navy that this is not an unusual thing.
Truitt talks about the tragedy for the first time in 8 years.
With the life insurance policy coming up, it appeared to be that there may have been some kind of motive there.
That was the original scenario, is that Ken knew about the life insurance policy, so he did something to cause this explosion to kill Clay so that he could collect the money.
He told me about it about a year after he had it, and he said, oh, by the way, if I ever die, you're going to be a rich man. I mean, I was 21. He was 23, 4. We're going to live forever.
The insurance murder theory fell apart when Truitt hired an attorney and fought back. As it turned out, he wasn't in a position to have sabotaged the ship. But then the story took a more scandalous turn.
I then think they went back, looked through all the service records, examined everybody's lockers, tried to find somebody they could tag as being gay. They could then sensationalize the story.
Rumors had circulated that Truitt and Hartwig, who spent a lot of time together, were actually gay lovers. One particular incident fueled the gossip.
Kendall Truitt and Clayton Hartwig were supposed to be on the security watch. They started wrestling, fighting around. One of the senior petty officers caught them, and immediately it's the suspicion that these guys are gay.
They were wondering what we were doing. At 1 in the morning, we're rolling around on the deck wrestling. I thought, how can you be so wrong? You know, we're kicking each other, and you guys think we're doing something funny.
The Navy used the relationship between these men to spin a bizarre new theory of mass murder and suicide. They alleged that Hartwig was depressed because his love affair with Truitt had gone sour.
I really thought, well, they're just bumbling along, and certainly they don't really believe this, and they'll let them investigate it. There's nothing there. I'm not gay. I didn't cause the explosion. My friend didn't cause the explosion.
Admiral Richard Milligan headed up the Navy's investigation.
It is the conclusion of this investigation that the tragic explosion on board USS Iowa on 19 April was caused by a wrongful, intentional act. That gunner's mate second class Clayton Hartwig was the most likely person to have introduced that detonating device.
But could the Navy convince the crew, the families, and the American public that a sailor had killed himself and 46 of his shipmates?
The statements made over and over again by Admiral Milligan were simply flat-out lies. And they crucified Clayton Hartwig.
Didn't happen because somebody was a quasi-homosexual or trying to commit suicide.
I think the decision was find a gay, put a bomb in his hand, have the bomb go off in the gun breech.
And I'm not doing this in the order of importance, but I also want to thank my wife, Ethel. My thanks to all of you, and now go on to Chicago and let's win there.
Robert F. Kennedy's shocking death left a nation wondering what might have been. The Kennedys are the country's best-known family. Some refer to them as American royalty, wealthy, ambitious, glamorous, but also scarred by devastating tragedies.
This was the site of one of those tragedies, the old Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. Bobby Kennedy's presidential dream ended inside this hotel on June 5th, 1968. Kennedy was leaving a victory rally when a gunman opened fire.
Bobby Kennedy was the 7th of 9 children. He once said, "When you come from that far down, you have to struggle to survive." He helped put his older brother, John F. Kennedy, in the White House and served as his Attorney General. After John's death, Bobby became first a senator and then a presidential candidate.
Kennedy, California can make the difference.
I remember watching him on television the night of the election victory in California. And for the first time, he seemed to be totally in command of himself. He had that kind of grace and ease. He always seemed a little nervous and fidgety before then. And I got a feeling that he was not running anymore as his brother's surrogate or replacement. He was running as himself.
During the summer of '68, Bobby Kennedy was drawing massive crowds and gaining political power as he traveled across America, campaigning for the presidency. Kennedy's speechwriter, confidant, and friend, Dick Goodwin, was with him in California.
I was with him through his campaign, and I was with him when he was shot. I was at the hotel in Los Angeles when he was killed and spent that night in the hospital, and we came back and went to the funeral, and that was the end of my association with the Kennedys.
Senator Kennedy has been shot.
My brother need not be idealized or enlarged in death beyond what he was in life. To be remembered simply as a good and decent man who saw wrong and tried to right it, saw suffering and tried to heal it, saw war and tried to stop it.
Bobby's life, from the time of his brother John's assassination to his own untimely death, is the subject of the FX original movie RFK. Dick Goodwin is the film's executive consultant.
I think it's important to do it because it was such an important piece of history. Small piece, unfortunately, cut off by gunmen's bullets twice.
The producers say this story offers a different point of view.
There have been many stories about the Kennedys, and I think most of them have been about John Kennedy. And we really wanted to do the story about Bobby Kennedy.
Action. There have been a lot of biopics about the Kennedys. I think this is different from any of them. This is an internal struggle of Bobby and his growth and his dealing with Jack's death.
I'm trying to concentrate more on the personal story, on the human drama,
on this great Greek tragedy that unfolds here.
Director Robert Dornhelm had only one actor in mind for the demanding lead role.
How many of you support the war in Vietnam?
FX put this into development about 1.5 years ago, and at that time, Robert Dornhelm, our director, said there's one guy that can play Bobby Kennedy, and his name is Linus Roach.
I was convinced that he's the best, and I really had to put my foot down and convince them, because of course, why get an English Bobby Kennedy?
Let me see the look one more time. Can you get up?
This was very daunting. The idea of playing an American icon that everybody knows so much about. There's so much information on him. It was like, oh my God, this is probably insane.
Mr. Murphy, I think I might suggest that your sheriff reconsider his procedures in connection with these matters. Also, can I suggest that during the luncheon period, you all read the Constitution of the United States?
It's about who was Bobby Kennedy and what he actually was starting to become and what he represented and what he could have been for the United States, what he could have been for the world.
Linus's portrayal of Bobby is kind of eerily reminiscent to me of the real-life Bobby Kennedy.
We knew to get Jack reelected, we'd have to take a harder look at Vietnam. We would never have pursued an irrational policy.
So, what do you think now?
Well, I still think we did the right thing to get in there at the beginning.
Several well-respected actors take on other key roles, including Oscar nominees David Paymer and James Cromwell, Golden Globe winner Ving Rhames, and Martin Donovan. The filmmakers made accuracy a top priority.
We really had to do mountains and mountains of research to make sure we got it right.
There's so much visual knowledge about this family. To recreate it and doing it right is an added challenge.
And there are tons of resources that we can use, and we've used all different resources, but I think the most important thing is that we have Dick Goodwin, who was there.
You know this place?
Yes, sir, I do. Just looking at now a little scene I just watched filmed in the Oval Office is really, I mean, just strikes me as being so true to life.
We've had to be very meticulous about recreating everything from wardrobe to hair and makeup to the sets.
Linus Roach is just brilliant as Robert Kennedy.
I genuinely love this man.
The FX original movie RFK explores 5 years in the life of Robert F. Kennedy, from his brother's assassination to his own tragic death. British actor Linus Roach anchors the film with his portrayal of the American political legend.
I think Linus Roach is just brilliant in this role as Robert Kennedy.
He even has the voice down. There's no doubt when you watch him, you really feel you're almost in Bobby Kennedy's presence again.
And let me just say that I have absolutely no presidential ambitions whatsoever, and neither does my wife, Ethelbert.
Bobby Kennedy's hair fell across his forehead in a certain way, and we really styled it to make sure it would look like that. Linus even grabs it in the same way when it's windblown that Bobby grabs it to sort of push it out of his eyes.
It's more being the sense of when I'm just there, I'm in the suits and it's all done, and I'm just in the scenes and doing it, and suddenly the sparks come out, little sparks of who he was, that I suddenly feel like, yes, that's it. But it hasn't been for me that I look in the mirror and go, that's Bobby Kennedy, because, you know, I don't look exactly like Bobby Kennedy. And I think if you get that, and then you enjoy the playing of it, and you actually love the person, which I do, I genuinely love this man.
The movie delves into the tense, real-life relationship between Bobby Kennedy and President Lyndon Johnson, evident during a scene that takes place when Johnson moves into the Oval Office immediately after John Kennedy's death.
Those guys did not like each other.
On the one hand, he is doing what he has to do. He has to be in that office. He has to be the one responsible. And on the other hand, of course, it's a lifetime of ambition being realized in the most bizarre way. And he is sitting there contemplating, my God, I've gotten here, but I've gotten here this way. What does it mean?
He sort of towers over Bobby Kennedy, and LBJ and Bobby were really butted heads a lot. You know, they weren't friends at all.
You see the animosity that he and Bobby shared for each other, and how that really colored what Johnson's administration was like to some degree.
Cromwell's biggest challenge in playing Johnson was the dialect.
Tonight,
I want to speak to you of peace in Vietnam.
He's kidding. The old man is kidding.
With our hopes and the world's hopes.
What's he doing?
Accordingly, I shall not seek, and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
I don't look like Johnson. And so nobody expects that, but you expect the dialect.
He is a perfect example where he can very believably play the character without being physically similar.
I'm not that. This is not me. This is all quilted. I'm quilted.
Director Robert Dornhelm created an unconventional visual technique to reveal Kennedy's innermost thoughts.
It's really his inner voice, his own voice, but that can be expressed through dialogue, of course, much better than through voiceover. So we have the shadowy figure, Big Brother, that watches over him.
Martin Donovan takes on the role of John Kennedy.
So what are you going to do about it? Sell the house, sell the boat?
It's not a ghost story. It's about what's banging around in Bobby's head. So we can take a lot of liberties with Jack.
It's almost a dreamlike sense of Bobby dialoguing with his dead brother.
Dick Goodwin's memories of the Kennedys were especially helpful to David Paymer, who plays Goodwin in the film.
So that's it then? You're really out?
You heard me.
Well, then I'm gonna go work for McCarthy. Goodwin politically was pragmatic, and he understood the Kennedys' need to do things right politically at the same time that they were trying to change the country.
What about Vice President? Lyndon's being pressured to ask you.
Is that the inside word? I guess you ought to know.
That's a wonderful balancing act to play as an actor, because you're balancing the head and the heart.
I'm sure he's probably better at being me than I am.
The roles of two other top Kennedy advisors are played by actors Sergio DiZio and Sean Sullivan.
Mark Arm, coming out against the president, a fellow Democrat in a time of war. It's not smart.
These cigars are good, Dick. Where'd you get them?
From Castro. Well, a friend of Castro.
Okay, cut.
Some of the scenes in the movie are so close to reality, even the actors were moved.
One that was just eerie to be a part of was when Bob got up on the flatbed truck to tell the audience in Indianapolis Martin Luther King had died. And the way the scene was set up, it looked so much like the documentary footage. And just standing off to the side before we even did it, it's just, this is the place, this is happening.
I had a member of my family killed.
But he was killed by a white man. We have to make an effort in the United States. We have to make an effort
to understand, to get beyond or go beyond these rather difficult times. What we need in the United States is not violence and lawlessness, but is love and wisdom and compassion toward one another.
It's a sacrifice.
Everything that Bobby Kennedy says in '68 is still not fulfilled.
The nation mourned when Robert F. Kennedy was killed by an assassin before he could fulfill his dream of becoming president. He was 42 years old. The FX original movie, RFK, explores the last 5 years of his life.
Recreating the tragedy of the shooting here at the Ambassador Hotel was an emotionally charged experience for the makers of RFK. Ironically, it was the last scene filmed for the movie.
It's a coincidence that it's the last scene we are shooting in this movie.
It's a very, very dramatic scene, a very emotional scene, a very sad scene, a very tragic scene.
Kennedy's remains were transported by a slow train from New York to Washington, D.C. Thousands gathered along the route to pay tribute. Due to the overwhelming outpouring of emotion, the casket's arrival was delayed for hours, forcing an evening service. Robert F. Kennedy is the only person ever buried in Arlington National Cemetery at night.
The movie ends with Kennedy's own words.
The last speech that we are having over the credit sequence of this movie could apply today. If a politician today would read that speech, everything that Bobby Kennedy says in '68 is still not fulfilled and still waits to be accomplished.